Merry meet, witches. Welcome to the Witch Hats and Broomsticks podcast with the high priestess of all things witchy, your host, Ginger Q.
Hello, and welcome to my first episode of Witch Hats and Broomsticks. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I am super excited and totally delighted to be offering up this show for those of you who are discovering your path in witchcraft. This show is for those of you who are maybe new to the craft. You're looking around, trying to figure out how to get started, what to do, where to go, all that good stuff. You could be reading a million books and trying to gain information that way, but still, you want more. The show is also for those people who have been following the craft for a while, and maybe you're looking to expand your awareness or look into some different methods, maybe get some inspiration and connect with other people in a safe, healthy environment. Or you could be that seasoned crone who's been walking this path from the day you were born in all of your lifetimes, and here you are just to check out what this crazy chick is going to be talking about. So I want to share a little bit about me. My name is Ginger Quinlan, aka GQ, Mama G, Soul Mama, Mystic Mama. I've been called all of those things in my lifetime because before I started doing this podcast, I was a scientifically tested, certified psychic medium who has been doing readings and healings and teaching people for the last 38 years, most of my life. So those of you who may be tuning in today because you know me as a psychic medium and a teacher of all things healing and metaphysical may not know that I'm also into witchcraft. I was always a little strange. I always felt like I was weird. I didn't fit in very well. And I think it all started when I was a kid. So let me share a little bit about my path. How did I come into it? Well, I feel like I was always into it. I was taken away from my birth mom at 6 months old and adopted out within 4 days to a very traditional Christian family. My dad was a metallurgical engineer and my mother was an executive secretary who became the mom to 4 adopted children. I was the oldest. Then they adopted my sister and then my 2 brothers, and we became a family. We lived in Washington State, and it was absolutely wonderful. My father was not just a well-known metallurgical engineer. He was also really well known in Washington for being an iris hybridizer. He crossbred irises, creating some of the most beautiful flowers anyone has ever seen, and then taking them to the Iris Society and selling them. So all my baby pictures and all the way growing up, I'm in the garden. I was totally in the garden with my father, helping him plant iris, digging in the dirt, playing with the weeds, listening to the bees and the birds, watching him do his thing. He would dig holes in the ground and tell me, Ginger, go plant your feet in the dirt. And then he'd bury my feet and he'd tell me to be the most beautiful tree in the garden and tell me to move my arms and wiggle my head. And those were my branches and my leaves all moving in the wind. And then, because my dad was all into rocks and metals, he would always have some mica with him and he would crumple it up and make these flakes of mica, which was like crystal glitter, and he'd sprinkle it over my little tree head and tell me, now you're a tree with sparkles. You're a princess tree. And I totally felt like a princess tree I totally felt like my dad was the king and he was making me something very magical. So at a very young age, I was always in the dirt, connected to the dirt, paying attention to what was going on with Mother Earth, and out there with my big elf of a dad who made me feel like I was the most beautiful fairy princess in the universe. At 10 years old, my dad got a different job and we moved to Colorado, where my mom and my dad were both from. Both their parents still lived in Colorado. We moved into a really big ranch home that had lots of acreage. I think it was like an acre and a half that my dad could tear up and plant all his beautiful irises in. And he did. So after we moved into this house in Denver, it became kind of a test for me and my own personal survival skills. And as I tell you this, please know that all these things happened to make me the person I am today. My father began to travel all the time. He was gone 2, 3, 4 months at a time, working for Johns Manville Fiberglass Company. He went and oversaw plants that were making fiberglass for people. So he was the designer for a whole lot of those plants. My mom was home taking care of 4 kids by herself with no help, none. And we were all growing, becoming teenagers. And I really believe my mom was completely overwhelmed with the whole thing. So she became very abusive and pretty violent with the 4 of us. While we were going through this, my abilities became very, very strong. I was seeing shadow people in the basement of our house where my room was. I was hearing voices all the time. I really thought I was cray-cray. I would see things walking down the banister and the stairs of our house. It was crazy. And I couldn't say a word, not a word. So I didn't. I kept it to myself and just watched as my mom got crazier and our family fell apart more and we got older and punishments happened all the time. But thank goodness for some of those punishments because it took me to meeting my very first witch. Yeah. I got in trouble for failing math. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I failed math. I absolutely sucked at math. I didn't get it. I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. So I didn't. I sat in class and I drew pictures of fairies and angels and things that I saw in the classroom. So I got in big trouble. And our punishment was to go out and weed these iris gardens that were not getting any attention because my dad was gone all the time. So I remember one weekend, I was 13. I was out grumbling, making a lot of noises about this wasn't fair, I shouldn't have to do this, blah, 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 doing a 13-year-old temper tantrum in the garden with the weeds. And my next door neighbor, Mrs. C, saw me. She happened to be out in her garden weeding. And she came over and asked me if I would like to come over and help weed her garden. My first thought was, no, but okay, it's got to be better than sitting here by myself. So I did. I went over to her house. I hadn't really been to her house before. And it was beautiful on the outside. I walked into this aromatic paradise in her backyard, which I never would have guessed was there because her lawn was all grown up with weeds. She had shrubberies everywhere. They were out of control. But here in this tiny little space that was her garden was peppermint and sage and rosemary and roses and digitalis, and it was all blooming and it was beautiful. And I felt like I just walked into my home. That's how familiar it felt to me. So she said to me, I need to weed around all the herbs and be very careful not to pull them up. Some are delicate, they'll come up easy. And I went, okay. So I'm weeding with her, and she starts singing to her plants. And I'm looking at her going, okay, my dad did some weird, crazy stuff out in the dirt, but this lady's singing to her plants. And I thought it was so freaking cool. She goes, I'm helping them grow. I'm telling them that I love them. And I stroke their little leaves like their heads, and I tell them that they are the best plants and they grow big and strong. I thought she was the coolest person I ever met. So I thought, well, I could do that over in my dad's garden. Maybe there won't be so many weeds. So then she goes on to tell me that the dirt can feel me pulling up the weeds and to thank it. And she would pat the dirt and think, okay. Then she said, peppermint is great in tea. If you drink it, steam it, it's wonderful. If you have a headache, come over and grab some rosemary and chew on some rosemary. It'll get rid of your headache. If you want to flavor your food, this kitchen sage is wonderful. It's not like the sage that cleans houses. And I'm thinking to myself, how does sage clean houses? And I remember that day so vividly because there were so many things that she said to me that I didn't understand in my head. But my heart was saying, this is so awesome. I like this. I want to learn everything. So that day with Mrs. C turned into having a mentor come into my life, which I desperately needed, to teach me about the earth, about energy, about healing, how the birds talk, who the birds are, how the trees move. We laid on the grass and looked at clouds. She talked to me about today is solstice, and I didn't know what solstice was. And I thought, there is some amazing thing happening here. It started me on my path. At 15, it changed. And my path drifted because my dad got a different job in a different state. He got a promotion. He was made the chief engineer of the Willows, California asbestos plant. So we rented out our house. We moved to Willows, California. It was this really, really small town. If you blink, you miss it. There were not very many people there, and it was farmers. Lots and lots of farmers. It was agriculture. It was animals. It was a small school. And I went straight into high school. In Colorado at 15, I was in junior high. At 15 in California, I was in high school. So I went from 3,000 students to 1,000 students. I loved it. It was amazing. My Future Farmers of America teacher. I don't know if my parents were having a humorous breakdown when they put me in Future Farmers of America, but they stuck me in Future Farmers of America. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason, and this too happened for a reason. Because first, my FFA teacher was incredibly handsome. He smelled good. He smelled like my dad. He smelled like dirt and Old Spice. So I immediately liked him. But at 16, everything changed. My dad got transferred back to Colorado. We moved back into our rental house. And I went back to high school in a 3,000 plus student environment. My father traveled all the time again for even longer extended amounts of time. Mrs. C had moved, and there was a new family in there, and I didn't know them. So my mentor was gone, totally gone. My mom decided to get us all really heavily into church. So from 16 to 28, I was a church girl. I have been baptized so many times, I should have drowned. Totally, I'm being honest here. All the times that I went to church, while I was in youth group, while I was singing in choir, while I was singing praises to God and Jesus and all of that, I would sit in church or in choir or in front of the piano, because I played the piano, and feel the energy of spirit and think to myself, this preacher is talking about going to hell, hellfire, brimstone, if you do wrong, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, whatever. And I would think to myself, if he stopped yelling for a minute, he would notice that there were angels all around him and that the energy in this place could be so healing. And am I the only one feeling that? And as soon as I got out of church, I would go outside and sit in the grass or hug the tree that was in the front yard of the church we were going to, because it was this great big beautiful oak tree. And all I wanted to do was give that energy that I absorbed in that church to the ground, because I didn't like the way it felt. I got married at 19 to a very Christian man. We moved into our apartment, our first apartment, and we had 2 kids, and we went to the church that was across the street for the entire time I was married. And then I got divorced at age 28. Grew up, changed, everything changed, and went on to be a single mom with 2 kids. And then I met my second witch, who became my husband. I met Christopher at Roller City, the roller rink where I met my first husband. I met him and we dated some, and then we got more serious, and then he told me he was a witch. And I said, "Oh, really?" I didn't know what to say to him, because for all this time I hadn't told anybody about my abilities. I hadn't told anyone about my interests. I was very secretive about all of it because it wasn't okay to talk about these things in my house. Either house, married house, or the house I grew up in. So I told him, and it was like I went to confession, only I didn't have to be forgiven for anything. He totally understood it. He totally made me feel like I was okay just being me. And it was the first time ever I felt validated for being who I was, although I wasn't really sure who I was because I didn't have enough information. So it was a secret for a very, very, very long time for me. And to tell him was like this opening of my entire awareness, and my world came alive, because he said, "Ginger, tomorrow I'm taking you somewhere special." And he took me to Isis Bookstore in Denver, Colorado. It was a great, big, beautiful metaphysical store owned by witches. I had never met another witch. I'd never been in a metaphysical store. I had never seen so many books about what I was searching for. I was totally enthralled with the whole thing. That began my path into really embracing my inner witch, learning all about the craft as much as I could. I wanted to buy every single book they had. I started a reading practice. I got really good at it. I started getting clientele, too many to have in my house because I was doing it out of my house. I actually had another job and had to quit my job because so many people wanted readings. And then I started looking for a place to do my work, which brought me to my third meeting of witches. That's right. I met more. I found Metamorphosis Bookstore in Inglewood, Colorado, and I found my tribe. Really, they found me because they brought me in They let me sit in classes. If I did the psychic fairs, I could take all the classes I wanted to. That was the trade agreement. So I scooped up every class they had, worked every single fair, took in as much information from all the witches, the Celtic witches, the fairy witches, the elven witch that was there. I learned about how to protect myself, how to work in a circle, how to create magic, how to move energy. I learned all of it. It was amazing. And then I stayed on that path. So fast forward. I got divorced from Chris. I was doing readings for a living. I was studying, and then I started teaching. And then I found a coven, and I found a mentor, and I learned even more. I studied Wicca pretty heavily, but I felt like Wicca was not the whole thing. It was just a little section of witchcraft because there were these rules and regulations in Wicca, which are all fine and good, but if you really want to get into the bigger aspects of witchcraft, you have to work with the dark to know the light, work with the light to work with the dark. And in Wicca, there was not that kind of choice. It was, you will do good, you will always do good, karma, the rule of 3, 3 times 3 times 3, what you put out always comes back. And that was scary. It was kind of like church. So I never felt like Wicca was all that in a bag of chips for me. So I kept on searching. During that time, I had opened a metaphysical store and I met some other witches who were more like gray witches. They would work with the light and work with the dark, which means that just like in nature, there are good things that happen and then there are storms. And when there are storms, you work with the energy of the storms. If there's something positive, suddenly something negative can come up and you work with the negative and the positive. Whereas in Wicca, it's all positive, which is not always very realistic. So I learned some more things from them, took some more classes, went to some different coven meetings. And let me tell you what a coven is. A coven is a group of other magical people, witches, at any level of learning or teaching, and it can be any kind of tradition. So I would say to you, those people who are new witches who are listening to me today, be careful what you choose, because if it doesn't resonate to you, it's probably not the right place for you. All right, I will say that, because I ran into that numerous times in my journey of working in groups, and the group had a different agenda that I could not even imagine. And I leave there shaking my head going, what did I just leave there? So in my journey, I found the people that I like to connect with were positive. They knew the difference between light and dark magic. They knew the difference between doing good and healing and working with herbs, and then just being nasty to other people, which I didn't really connect with. I never connected with that. So my journey brought me to South Carolina. In 2000, I met another man and he got transferred to a new job in South Carolina. And I went with him because I knew I was done in Colorado. My kids were grown up. I was all finished. I needed to go do something different. So we moved to South Carolina, and I thought, what is this little witch going to do in the Bible Belt? So I thought I would open an angel store. I did. I opened an angel store in Lexington, South Carolina, and that store attracted every witchy person it possibly could. I didn't have a sign on the front of my store for almost 6 months. And people would drive by it and just stop and come in and say, I don't know why I stopped here. I think I felt you. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Because I would tell my little angel store, attract the right people. So I started attracting, and they were asking me for all the tools that are used in witchcraft, for cauldrons, for incense, for oils. Was I teaching classes? Was I doing readings? And I said, okay, I'm in a 600 square foot little old house. I need to expand. So I did. I expanded my store. I went totally metaphysical, witchy, turned it into a witch store, and had my business in South Carolina for 7 years. I sponsored and created the first ever witches ball in South Carolina, and we had over 1,000 people fly in from all over the United States to attend the ball. It was on Halloween. It was Samhain. We had a guest coven come in and do a ritual in the hotel. And it was absolutely amazing. We had pagan vendors selling herbs, oils, all the things that you could find that were hard to find in South Carolina because it was the Bible Belt. And everything was incredibly underground. So I brought it out of the dark and into the light. As a psychic medium, I met so many amazing people and read for so many beautiful souls. As a witch, I worked with so many people to do healing and protection and to really help them move forward in their lives, get unstuck, which I did in my psychic mediumship work too. But now I've retired from doing readings. I had my thyroid taken out 7 months ago, and it really affected the way I talked, and you may hear that during this podcast because if I talk for super long times, my voice goes a little squeaky and I kind of lose it, but it's getting better every single day. So while I've had the 7 months of not being able to talk very much and being very quiet and not doing readings, I have been making bath salts and body products and making witch hats. Yes, I make witch hats. I have been setting up a website to sell magical tools, all the altar tools. I love to teach, so I am creating little mini courses for anyone who is interested to learn about the craft. And it's a broad overview of the craft. It is not any specific kind of branch of craft. So some of the courses I'm putting together is like fairy magic, candle magic, working with the elements, calling in the directions, meditating to get a magical name for yourself, working on how you can embrace your inner witch even more, how to make your house magical, things like that. And they're going to coordinate, all these courses will be coordinating with the podcasts that I'll be doing. So let me share with you a little bit about the show, how it came to be. I had several students who asked me last year, would I teach them fairy magic? And I thought, that would be so cool. But at the time, my thyroid was acting up and I wasn't feeling very good. In fact, I had Hashimoto's super bad, had no energy, couldn't get anything done, and I was really struggling with my psychic mediumship business because I kept losing my voice. And I just didn't feel good. So I said, yes, I want to do that. I want to get it going. I didn't know how to teach that, though. How to teach it online, because the people who were asking me were not in my state. In fact, I really didn't know anybody in Georgia. I knew everybody everywhere else, but not here. So I thought, how can I do this? Well, then, shortly after that, I totally lost my voice, which got me to the doctors to get my thyroid fixed. In that time of getting my thyroid issues taken care of, having my thyroid removed, being silent for 7 months, I had more people asking me, could you please teach magic? Will you teach witchcraft? Will you teach how you do candle magic, crystals, all of it? And I really kind of hesitated, but then I went, I love those things. I would love to teach that. So I was looking around for the last 7 months while I was being quiet and how I could go about doing that and making it available to a lot of different people who may not have time to do a class online, who is not interested in being in some kind of group, maybe wants to do something solitary, but they're exploring, or maybe they just wanted to listen to something different from a different person and a different perspective. So I started researching. I watched a lot of YouTube videos of other people teaching, and I noticed a lot of the people teaching are really, really young witches who are trying to find answers themselves. I didn't see a lot of older people teaching in the way that I learned, where it was all very verbal teaching, hands-on teaching, showing you what to do, how to do it, and kind of getting you to a place where you could feel your own energy and magic and be comfortable with it. So then I went and ordered a bunch of books. I've always read a lot of books about craft, and the newer books were interesting to me also because I hadn't read a lot of witchcraft books in the last few years. But I was kind of surprised because some of the things they talked about, made no sense to me whatsoever. And I thought, maybe it's time for me to start speaking up and sharing the old ways and sharing some of the traditions and really offering what I know and what I've been taught from some pretty amazing witchy people about the craft. So let me say right now, before I get a lot of flashback from this, is take what you need and leave the rest. I am not the know-all, be-all of witchcraft. No, I'm just going to share with you what I know. So when I first joined into organized craft, the first thing that the leaders asked me was, what kind of witch are you? So this part of the show is going to be about what kind of witch are you? You who are listening with me today. Were you considered a weird kid? Yes, I was. Many, many witches feel like they didn't fit in at all as a kid. They were different. They were sensitive. They were like outsiders looking into other people's lives and going, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense. A lot of witches are very, very, very independent people as grown-ups. And as kids, they were pretty much the same way. And it's really typical in my travels through different witchcraft communities and working with witches is that they really like things that are not the norm. They like to be their own unique, incredibly magical, wonderful selves. And you'll find that. You'll find that in the witch communities. Okay? Does nature speak to you? When you're out in nature, do you feel like this open-hearted connection that is so strong and so powerful you can't even imagine not being in nature? This is part of being a witch. Because witch is nature worship. Witches connect to nature. Are you someone who feels the environment so strong that it messes with you? Can you feel if there's going to be an earthquake or a volcano is going to explode or a meteor is going to skim by our Earth like we just had that happen? Do you feel those things? Do you get it in your hands when there's a big storm? Do you feel it in your stomach when the lightning and the thunder is crashing? And do you feel like it charges you up? This is part of being a witch. You connect to the energy of Mother Earth and the universe. And how about the moon? Do you resonate to what the moon is doing? Do you feel like on those days when it's full moon, you can't sleep, you're super tired, or you're super energized? On those days when there's an eclipse of the moon, how do you feel? Do you feel jacked up? Do you feel turned on? Do you feel like you're so in touch with yourself, You can't hardly stand it. This is all very witchy type behavior. And you will feel it so strong that it might make you behave different. It may make you look up at the moon and say, I'm feeling you. I am so feeling you. And women who are listening, does this happen to you every single month? Does your cycle, for those of you who are still having a cycle, does it flow with the moon? Are you that in tune with the moon? This is a very, very witchy thing. The moon is considered very feminine energy. And for men who are super sensitive and emotional, you feel the moon too. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. The moon is a huge influence on us. Witches use the moon. We connect to the moon. We talk to the moon. She's our friend, and we work with her constantly. And if you do, then you're pretty witchy. Are you sensitive to other people's energies? Do you feel other people? Do you walk in the room and you feel people? Do you dislike being in a crowded grocery store? I do. I don't like going when it's crowded. My husband, on the other hand, loves to go when it's crowded. But it's because I feel way too much. And I feel all these people, and I see their ghosts and their spirits when I walk in. He goes in and says, I see chicken and food and other people. I see ghosts and hear voices and feel anxiety. It's a very witchy thing. Do you like things that are out of the norm, kind of macabre? Do you like death? Do you like going to cemeteries? Do you like being in the energy of dead people? This is also very witchy because witches deal with life and death. It's a normal thing, the light and the dark. Witches deal with the cycle of life. They deal with spooky things because we like it. It represents the shadow sides of ourselves. So, are you psychic? Do you read tarot cards? Do you read bones? Do you read tea leaves? This is also a very witchy thing. Do you like to be out in the garden? Would you prefer to be in the garden than anywhere else? Also very witchy. So, how many yeses did you say while I was describing these questions? What kind of witch are you? Are you a witch? If you said no to all of these, that's okay too. You may be just coming into your own types of magic, or you have a specific kind of path you follow, and that is perfectly okay. It's all okay. This show is just to awaken you to some other alternatives. So let's talk about what types of witches are out there. Because in witchcraft, there are so many branches of witchery. And I want to say to you, don't get stuck in the labels that I'm going to be talking about right now, because it doesn't really matter. Take what you need and leave the rest. But I want to give you some things to think about before the end of the show. So let me just talk about some of the handful of names and divisions of witchcraft that I'm familiar with and you may be familiar with. And as I go through it, you may go, yeah, but no, yeah. Just go with it. It's fine. So the different kinds of witchcraft, there are folk witches. Lots of folk witches in South Carolina, I'll tell you that. Folk witches use old traditions. They use mountain magic. They use traditional root work, voodoo, hoodoo, strega, brujeria, and other practices. They are typically focused on practical witchery, which is creating change in their lives or other people's lives and working with ancestors. They use the very old traditions to do witchcraft. A green witch. Green witches work primarily with nature. They work with herbals like I do. I am probably considered a green witch. They use a lot of kitchen witch type techniques, putting herbs in their food, using herbs to do magic, creating herbs in the garden, making magical gardens, making sacred space outside. They use the power of plants in their magical workings. Then there is the glamorous witches, the glam witches. They use their glamorous energies to draw attention to themselves, to be able to blend in wherever they go, and to use different colors, scents, things that really draw people into them and get them noticed. Those are glam witches. Are you a glam witch? Eclectic witches. I know a ton of eclectic witches. I would probably consider myself an eclectic witch also, because I've worked with so many different traditions that I combine what I like and I leave the rest, and you will find that you will do that too. And I'm going to say that a lot. Take what you need and leave the rest, all right? So what is an eclectic witch? It's a witch that takes what works for them and leaves the rest. So they might like a ritual from a different tradition, like I also do fae magic, so I might like a really cool fairy magic ritual to bring in the energies of midsummer, and I'll take that ritual, but I'll also take something from the Celtic tradition and call in some Celtic energies to help me to invite the fae in and to do that ritual. Then I may combine it with some kitchen witchery and make some really yummy food for myself and my guests, and add some herbal libations in there, and take all of those traditions and mix them all up in my little witchy cauldron bowl in my kitchen. And that makes me an eclectic witch. Maybe you're an eclectic witch. And then we have necromancers. I am also a necromancer. These are witches who work with the dead and spirits. I really have to say, when this was happening to me as a kid, I thought I was schizophrenic. I thought maybe I was a multiple personality. Maybe I was just crazy because I was adopted. Maybe I was imagining all of it, but I wasn't. And when I was reading the different kinds of witches to bring to this podcast, really exploring it so I could give you some really accurate information, I read necromancers. And I never considered myself a necromancer until I read this and said, necromancer witches use their spell work in connection to assistance from the spirits. I always call in the spirits. So that made me go, oh, that's so cool. That's just so cool. That brings us to the last kind, traditional witches. A traditional witch follows the structures of Gardnerian Wicca or Alexandrian Wicca or Dianic witchcraft. They're very traditional. Very, very, very traditional. These paths are considered religions, and they follow specific guidelines that are based on a lineage. So the lineage has been handed down by the priestesses, usually Wiccan priestesses, and that's how I learned. I had Wiccan priestesses who taught me, initiated me, and had me do a ton of homework to get my initiations. So this is for people who really like ceremonial magic and like to be guided with structure and rules. And a lot of witches started that way, especially witches that are my age, and then grew out of it. I grew out of it. There are also Dianic witches. So Dianic witches only have women in their groups. They only follow the goddess, not the god. Whereas other types of tradition have the gods and the goddesses. So Dianic witches just worship the goddess energy, all about feminine energy. And I have met some beautiful Dianic witches who just radiate this amazing goddess energy. So let's talk about warlocks. Not leaving you out, men. Warlocks. Warlock is considered an insult. When you call a witch a warlock, it's kind of insulting. Warlocks were created during the battles, I think it was the 16th and the 17th century. They locked the battle into place. But it's also an old English term meaning someone who's a traitor or a liar. So a lot of witches will cringe if you call them a warlock. However, lately, warlock has been coming back and the meaning has changed, especially in America. It really represents a sorcerer. So, men, if you get called a warlock now, someone's calling you a sorcerer. So, I want to leave you with these definitions and let you think about perhaps what kind of witch you are, what you might like to do in your craft. Maybe you're very settled in how you do your craft. But these are just some things to let you think about. Are you a witch? What kind of witch are you? If any of these descriptions resonate to you, explore those feelings, meditate on them. Let the energies guide you into discovering more of where your path is taking you. I want to thank everybody for listening today and allowing me to come into your lives and share my journey and share what this is going to be about in the future. I will be putting classes up on my website, themysticalwearshop.com, in the next 2 weeks. I'm getting them all wrapped up and ready to go. And just to add a little excitement, I am planning on doing full moon live rituals, not this month. We have the big full moon and an eclipse, but I'll be doing it next month. I just couldn't get it all pulled together fast enough to make it happen. And it will be happening on Podbean as a live stream. It might also be on YouTube. So I'll give you more information as we get closer to that time. I want to thank you so much and wish you an awesome, magical week. And thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.
Merry Part Witches. For more demonstrations, classes, and magical goodies, visit themysticalwearshop.com.